right, so thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Duggar. I'm the director of the Disability Resource Center here at Portland State. And in collaboration with EMSA, I am very excited to introduce you to our main speaker today, Terrill Thompson, who comes from the University of Washington. I wanted to say Oregon there.
Don't do that.
No, I'm just trying to bring it closer. I wanted to give you an introduction to Terrill, but before I do, maybe it would be helpful to give you more of an introduction to what we're doing here at Portland State in terms of making sure that content is more accessible proactively. So I have a number of bullet points here that I'd like to read. So first of all, the Office of Academic Innovation is currently working with faculty of Rethink projects and other courses in a proactive manner to make online content accessible. There's also a collaboration among OAI, the library, the Disability Resource Center, OIT is also a part of that, and they are finding a way to caption videos and also deliver captioned videos to students who need them. OAI has also recently announced, if you haven't heard, that it will be conducting a search for an accessibility consultant to work at OAI, specifically with faculty who are trying to make their courses more accessible. And if you weren't aware, the university had created, before I even arrived here about a year and a half ago, had created a draft of a university accessibility policy that has been detained for quite some time, but I think that you may be hearing more about that soon. That is something, though, that has been in the works for a while. And PSU has an online accessibility website, which I'm going to introduce you to. We recently rolled that out with some tips and best practices for creating accessible online content. And the specific impetus for Terrill's visit this week has been that EMSA recently announced that by May of 2015, all of its websites will be 100% accessible. So there's a lot going on here if you weren't already aware. I know some of this flies under the radar, but we wanted to make sure you knew that. And also, I'd like to show you a video that is on our accessibility website before Terrill gets started. So here's the website itself. It's www.pdx.edu/diversity/accessibility. It lives under the Global Diversity and Inclusions website. And here on the left, you can see the best practices and tips that I was mentioning. And we're going to show you a short video. It's about 5 minutes, which highlights the experiences of 3 of our students at Portland State who have disabilities, and also 2 administrators. One, sadly, who has since left us, Jackie Balzer, who is now at Willamette, and she was our Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs. And also Sana Andrews, our provost, is also speaking. So here we go.
I'm so proud to work at the largest urban university in Oregon and the most diverse. And that diversity includes students with disabilities, whether they are studying here on our campus or at a distance.
Many years ago, when I did my dissertation for my doctorate, it was on tactile maps, which are maps for the blind. And I mention that because I think oftentimes people don't think about the kinds of resources and tools that are needed by all of our students.
I'm Angel Chesimit. I'm a graduate student here at PSU, and I'm also totally blind.
My name is Stephen Brown. Signed name is Stephen Brown. I'm a deaf individual. I'm a student here at PSU, and I have been for some time now.
My name is Christine Getman, and I studied community health education at Portland State. I still need to finish my psychology degree, and I'll be going back to do that very soon.
Hi, I'm Terry Blosser, and I'm a student at Portland State. I'm a senior, and my major is history. I use several different accommodations. I use what we call e-text, and I also utilize something called real-time captioning, and I also utilize something called the FM monitor system.
I use a screen reader, and so I need documents in a format that my screen reader can access, which means usually a Word document or some PDF documents. So if there is something that's posted and it's not accessible, then that means that I'm only getting like 20% of what's required for that course.
I feel like teachers need to maybe be a little more open-minded and understand that need for closed captions. You know, I feel like it happens so often for me that I'm watching the interpreter in one place and then there's a TV screen or something else I have to follow that's in a separate placement to the interpreter. And it's like a tennis match. You have to look back and forth. If I'm watching the screen and it has the captions, I can see their face. I can see what's happening. I can see how the voice coincides with the facial expression and the emotion, and I understand all the language that's happening. You know, with the President Obama speech, for example, when they were talking about the healthcare reform passing, you know, that was a historical moment. That was this huge moment in time, and you knew there was this sense of inspiration, and people had that first moment of hearing what had happened, and it would impact all our futures, and it was this important moment in history, and I missed that.
I wouldn't change a lot about my experience of using online classes. However, I would ask that instructors be aware of a time difference for completing online tasks. It takes a little bit longer for me to navigate through the website, as well as completing long written assignments and essays.
I can do pretty much what any other student can, but it might take me just a little bit longer because I'm actually listening.
Heading level 1, welcome, recent message blank. Table with 4 columns and 3 rows. Blank. Hey. From. Receive. Graphic comment midterm exam developed. Table end. Pending test. Link graphic images.
Whereas when you use your eyes, you're actually scanning, and that is a lot faster.
In my opinion, if a student with a disability discloses that they need a specific accommodation or some sort of arrangement for completing the coursework, I believe that is opening the door for the instructor to actually ask questions and make sure that they can serve the student appropriately.
It's really important for me as a student with a visual impairment to have open communication with instructors in order for me to be successful in a class just like any other student.
We're not asked to be treated any different from any other student. We follow the course syllabus just like every other student. We are told, you have to read 100, pages or whatever before the next class. Trust me, I have to do 2 times, 3 times, possibly even 4 times as much work to be able to read those 100 pages compared to a normal sighted student. So it's a real challenge for somebody like myself.
As a community of scholars here at PSU, it's important that we're all committed to creating learning environments that are accessible for all learners. And certainly navigating those online courses and digital media requires us to use resources on campus like the Disability Resource Center in Smith Student Union, that the staff at the Disability Resource Center are consultants and helpers to faculty as they make these very important decisions about how to construct the learning environment, what sorts of tools to use, and how to remove barriers to learning in that classroom. So it's just so important that our faculty utilize all the resources that are available to them here at PSU to help both them as instructors and scholars to be successful, but especially to help our students to be successful in the classroom.
We're really doing a whole rethink of Portland State University's curriculum, and we have a great opportunity as we use more and more technology in order to be able to think about the ways in which our students learn and be able to provide them with the tools that they need. So my hope is that all of us, faculty in particular, but all of us, really take into account the kinds of things that we need to do to make this a great, accessible place for students.
I think that video, well, it's beautifully made, but I think it also just puts a face to the students who are sometimes invisible to those of us who are producing content for the web. And obviously to each of them, this work is really important. So with that, I'd like to introduce Terrill Thompson, who is the Technology Accessibility Specialist at DO-IT, which stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. And DO-IT is a grant-funded and award-winning enterprise run through the University of Washington since 1992. Their mission includes increasing the success of people with disabilities in challenging academic programs and careers, and promoting the application of universal design to information technology. And Terrill's primary role at DO-IT is to promote information technology accessibility by developing resources, delivering lectures and workshops, as he is today, and conducting research. Terrill has 20 years experience in the IT accessibility field and has presented internationally at numerous conferences and consulted widely and locally for private industry, as well as K-12 and post-secondary education entities on IT accessibility. So with that, please help me to introduce Terrill Thompson.
Thanks everybody for coming out. It's actually my third presentation today. How many of you were here for either of the first two? Got a few repeat visitors, and so I apologize to you guys that I'm going to show some of the same slides, just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page about what it is we're talking about exactly. But this will go pretty quickly, and what really we're hoping to accomplish here today, and it was advertised as an open forum, right? So just to get some discussion, it's great we've got so many people in the room, and I assume you all come from widely variant places across campus. But just to get some conversation about how to advance the state of accessibility at BSU. Jen just mentioned several things that are already going on. How can you all benefit from that or participate from that, or what other things could be going on to continue this effort? It takes a lot of people working together to improve accessibility. So I want to talk about the kind of the big picture of what we mean by web accessibility in particular, and technology accessibility maybe sort of more broadly. But I also want to move into sort of what we're doing at the University of Washington, just to sort of offer that as a comparison. Not that we've got all the problems solved, we're still trying to solve them ourselves, but I think it's good to have that sort of dialogue between different institutions to compare, contrast, and explore strategies together and see what we can learn from each other. So I won't say much yet sort of about my role within the UW and DO-IT and so forth. Thanks for the introduction, Jen. But we'll cover a bit more about how we do things a little bit later in the presentation. But to start with, I want to just sort of talk generally about the web. How do you use the web? What sort of ways is the web used to deliver educational, academic functions, or administrative functions? Certainly, those of you who have websites are using those to communicate something to very diverse audiences, people who comprise your audiences, a lot of different stakeholders out there. You may be using web pages in hypertext markup language, HTML, which is the language of the web, or you may be delivering content through documents, maybe PDF, maybe Word. All of those have accessibility issues that are actually very similar to one another. The accessibility issues that we face are the same in a lot of ways, regardless of what our delivery mechanism is. And we'll talk about all of these issues. Deliver of media, if you've got video, if you've got audio, then certainly there's a lot more of that happening over the web. We're using more and more web-based applications where we're not building things, but we're buying things, tools and software applications that we use to do what we do and allow students to do what they do, and faculty and staff to do what they do. Things like learning management systems, collaborative tools, administrative systems, and on and on. And we're sort of at the mercy of vendors who develop these products to develop them in a way that's accessible. or maybe we're not at their mercy, but maybe we have to take a proactive stance to make sure that they're delivering products that meet our needs, including needs for accessibility. So this is just sort of skimming the surface. There are lots and lots of ways that we use the web, and we can do quite a bit of brainstorming to build upon this list. But the bottom line is, what we really want to explore is, can everyone access these tools and resources? All the stuff that we're doing on the web, which permeates the lives of our students and ourselves as staff and faculty. Can everybody access these tools and resources? And how do we know that? Well, we need to define everyone in order to get a better understanding. And this is what might be a typical computer user. And I've asked this question earlier today. Let's see how you guys respond. How many of you can relate to that? How many of you consider yourselves a typical computer user? Let's see some hands. Yeah, so about half the hands go up. The rest of you, not typical? How many feel not typical computer users? Okay, some hands go up. So this is a very generic sort of computer user. They obviously have a monitor, so there's some visual piece to this interaction with technology. They are sitting at a desk. They have probably a keyboard sitting in front of them, maybe a mouse. And that is kind of the traditional model, that we use a keyboard and a mouse to provide input into the computer, and we get visual information back through a monitor. But it's kind of a dated model. Does this feel dated to you guys? And it just looks sort of dated. And part of that might be the big CPU box that I've chosen, but I think there are other reasons too, like the fact that a lot of people are walking around carrying a mobile device and accessing the web using their mobile device. And it may be an iPhone, but it may also be other flavors of mobile devices, Androids, smartphones. People have tablets and lots of different platforms and variety there. Not everybody is accessing content visually. Some people are accessing content audibly. So they're using a screen reader, or maybe they're using a mobile device, but they're in a hands-free setting. They're driving and they can't look down in order to get output, so they need to listen to output instead of accessing it visually. Same thing with speech input. Traditionally, that's been a technology that's used by people with physical disabilities who are unable to use a mouse or keyboard, perhaps, and they can dictate documents using voice. They can control applications using speech commands. But we've got more and more people who are using that sort of interface because we need that sort of hands-free access to information and to technology. We also have people who use a tactile interface. So people are using a refreshable braille device, which basically delivers information in the same way that a screen reader does, but it's delivering that through touch. So there's a row of dots that raise and lower as the person scrolls and explores a web page or a document or a software application. And they're getting content that way. So this is a lot of diversity, but really, again, it's just skimming the surface. So I could go on and on and on and build this model. Literally hundreds of different devices that people use to interface with technology. So as we're delivering content and developing websites or composing documents or creating whatever it is that we're creating and intending people to consume, we need to be aware that there is this technology diversity. That people access that information in a rich variety of ways. Even those of us who access information visually have lots of diversity. If we were to survey folks across the room, there are probably a diversity of screen resolutions. This is a screenshot from my MacBook Pro, where I can set it from 640 by 480 up to 1680 by 1050 and all points in between. So different computers have different resolutions by default, and people can change that default resolution. People can also change the font size in their browser, and a lot of people do that. So what somebody is seeing in their browser is not what you're seeing in your browser. And as you develop content, probably what you're delivering looks one way to you, but your audience is going to see it differently. Or maybe they're not going to see it, maybe they're going to hear it, or maybe they're going to feel it in their braille device. So lots of diversity. And really it's not, it's a gross oversimplification to sort of think of this as people with disabilities and people without. That there are people who can see perfectly, 20/20 vision or better, people who can't see at all, and most of us are somewhere in between. A lot of us in this room use assistive technologies. We've got glasses, so that improves our position on that spectrum. But regardless, there's a wide variety of visual ability amongst everybody. Same thing with hearing. Some people can hear really, really well. Some people can't hear at all. Most people fall somewhere in between. Ability to walk, ability to read print, write with pen or pencil, communicate verbally, tune out distraction. Lots and lots of different functions that we can look at. And if we plot people's ability based on that function, then it would be all over the map. So again, this is just sort of to stress that people are very, very diverse. And when we're talking about accessibility, we're really talking about just sort of broadening the spectrum of who we include in what we're in our target audience as we're designing things. So just a few examples to kind of accompany the examples that were in the video. These are some of the students who I've worked with in the Do It program. This is Jennifer. She is a public relations major, and she's using an IntelliKeys keyboard. So it's a larger keyboard than normal, and it has larger keys. And that's her reason for using this, is that she has a mobility impairment that prevents her from using a mouse. So her mode of operating the computer is to hold a stick in her hand and then hit these large size keys on her IntelliKeys keyboard. And so when she's accessing the web, she's using a keyboard interface. So she's never going to reach for a mouse and hover over something and click something. She's going to tab through a web page. She's going to press enter, and whatever other keys make sense in order to control whatever it is that's on the page. Wesley is a psychology major, and he has no use of his hands at all, and so he's not using a keyboard or a mouse, but he's using speech recognition. So he's got Dragon Naturally Speaking. He's able to operate the computer, able to dictate documents, everything that he needs to do, he does through speech, through voice commands. Nicole is blind, so she, like Angel in the video, is a screen reader user. She also uses a Braille device and can switch back and forth between the two. She actually recently graduated from Stanford with a degree in computer science and is now an engineer at Google. So she's building the next generation of software applications that hopefully will be accessible to her. Google is one of those vendors that we do a lot of business with that is kind of hit and miss on accessibility. They do some really wonderful things like with YouTube accessibility and the things they're doing with captions, but there are lots of things that Google produces that a screen reader user can't interact with, or somebody who's using speech recognition can't dictate a document with. And so, we're going to talk about vendors in a little bit, kind of our role in driving accessibility of their products. So each of those students had assistive technologies. But if you imagine that a person has an assistive technology, like a wheelchair in this case, so our assistive technology has gotten us onto the light rail and gotten us to this building and up onto the curb cut has allowed us to get up onto the sidewalk, and here we are at the bottom of these steps. How do we get into the building now? Our assistive technology isn't going to get us into the building. The building itself needs to be modified, needs to be designed in a way that we can get in with or without assistive technology. So maybe there's a ramp, maybe there's another entrance off to the side, maybe there's an elevator that will get us up there. but somehow or another the building has to kind of meet us halfway. And so when we're talking about websites and other sort of information technologies, it's the same sort of thing. We've got this variety of assistive technologies that people are using, or other devices that people are using, but the websites or the electronic documents or what have you need to be designed in a way that works for those assistive technologies. So there's communication all around. All parties have to be sort of part of this solution. So universal design is a phrase that's used a lot to sort of describe this. It's a process of designing a product, service, course, or environment, this is my definition, in a way that works well for a broad spectrum of users. So you're considering that full spectrum of people who are using a lot of different devices, a lot of different configurations, settings, different strategies, and trying to design whatever it is in a way that will work for all of those users. And standards play a key role in making that happen. That with web accessibility, there are standards that have been defined that specifically articulate what exactly an accessible website is, or an accessible document, or accessible software package. The W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, is a key player in standard development. So they have the HTML specification, so that's the language of the web, the markup language that makes web pages happen. And it has had accessibility from the very beginning. There have been alternate text for images, has always been part of HTML since 1992. Headings have always been part of HTML. In 1999, there were lots of additional features that were added to HTML that made full accessibility possible. Accessibility of online forms, accessibility of tables. So that's been there since 1999. Also in 1999, the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines came out. This is their effort to sort of inform anybody who's creating web pages how to do that in a way that is going to be accessible to everybody. Because they recognized early on that the web could either be this great equalizer and provide information in ways that were unprecedented when people with disabilities had to rely on everything in print to be converted into another format that they could access. Suddenly you got the web with all this stuff on it. But they also recognize that it could be a big barrier if it's not handled well. If content is created in ways that's not accessible. And so they created these guidelines to define accessibility. And ultimately there are 65 very specific checkpoints within WCAG 1 that define what web accessibility is. In WCAG 2008, so let's fast forward 9 years, they came out with an update, WCAG 2, which modernizes those guidelines so they are now more reflective of what the web has become, much more interactive, less sort of document-driven and more application-driven. So we now have web content accessibility guidelines that sort of speak to that. And we also have a new specification called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications, which makes it possible to communicate what's going on in very rich, dynamic online environments to assistive technologies. So it's kind of a higher level accessibility specification that makes really sort of cutting edge innovations that are delivered over the web accessible, or makes it possible to make them accessible. So WCAG 2 has 3 levels of success criteria built into it. And this is, I want to focus on this just a moment because this kind of ties into what our actual requirements are from a legal standpoint. They are level A, or sort of the basic, they provide the foundation for accessibility. So the core principles that you need to follow in order to not completely shut out some group of users. That's the level A success criteria. So things like alt text, structural markup like headings, being able to access everything with a keyboard. So if you're not a mouse user, you should be able to tab to and interface with all the controls on a web page. Captions on video, transcripts on audio, those are all things that fall under the level A success criteria. So that's your baseline. Level 2A, there are 13 additional of those, so those go on top of level A. So you get your level A baseline, and then if you want to be more accessible, then you also meet these other 13 criteria. And those include things like having good color contrast between foreground and background, and having visible focus for keyboard users. So as somebody is tabbing through a web page, they should be able to always see where they are right now on the page. That's often hard on a web page unless it's done properly. And then also audio descriptions on video. So if you've got video, if there's some content within that video that's communicated only visually, and a person who is listening to that video but can't see it, that if they're going to be missing out on some key piece of information, it needs to be audio description, which is a separate narration track that provides just a visual cue here and a visual cue there, kind of narration that accompanies the video and can be toggled on and off. There are different techniques for doing that. And then there's the final level, level 3A, 23 additional items, which are more challenging things that could be done to ensure that you have full accessibility. Things like sign language interpretation that accompanies video. So that would be an example. There's several other things that fall under level 3A. So you've got these 3 levels, and then you have laws like Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which require that covered entities ensure that their programs and services are accessible. So with Section 504, that was anybody who received federal funding. With the ADA, that's public entities. So either way, we as higher education institutions have to make sure our programs and services are accessible. But both of those laws predate the web, predate technology as we know it now. And neither one specifically says anything about web accessibility or technology accessibility. So we've always just sort of been left to wonder then, well, okay, I know that I need to make sure my programs and services are accessible. I'm delivering those over the web. How do I define web accessibility? What exactly does that mean? What do I need to do? So we've been left to wonder that. There isn't actual guidance in those laws. But Section 508 gave us some hope there that same Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was amended in 1998. And among those amendments, Section 508 required that the federal government ensure that its information technology was fully accessible. So anything that federal agencies purchased or built or used needed to be accessible. And the Access Board, a federal agency, was charged with defining accessibility. So they had to develop standards that would define what accessibility is so that Section 508 can be measured and enforced. And so they did that. In 2001, they came out with their Electronic and Information Technology Accessibility Standards. They drew, for the web accessibility portion of that, they drew heavily on what the W3C had already done, because the WCAG had been published just a couple of years prior to this. So they had that to draw from. They took the highest priority checkpoints, changed the language a little bit so that it was enforceable and measurable, and then came out with a set of standards that is written into the law. And so these are federal standards. They're published in the Federal Register. And so this is the only legal standard we have that defines web accessibility. But it is a legal standard that defines web accessibility. So we know, if it comes down to a court case, we're debating what actually web accessibility is, we have Section 508 that tells us what that is. 2001 was a long time ago in web years, and things have changed enormously on the web since then. And the Access Board is right now working on an upgrade to those standards, but they've been at that for several years now, and we're not sure, nobody's really sure when that's going to come out. But there are some developments there. The second bullet here, they released 2 drafts so far. They're updated by standards, and the most recent, which was in December 2011, they basically just said if you comply with WCAG 2 at level 2A, then that will be considered meeting Section 508. So they're using the language harmonized. These standards are harmonized with WCAG 2 at level 2A. So that's just a draft, but that sort of suggests that that's where they're leaning, that level 2A is kind of the target. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice has also expressed the same sort of thing. They're working on new web accessibility regulations for the ADA, and so that is to clarify what's required under the ADA related to web accessibility. And in their request for public comments, that was in 2011 as well, they specifically asked the question, should we adopt the WCAG 2 level 2A success criteria as our standard for website accessibility? So both the DOJ and the Access Board seem to be looking at level 2A as the target. And so we don't have specific law yet that says you must comply at level 2A to WCAG 2, but that seems to be kind of where things are headed. So that's, I think, a good target for us to sort of work toward. So with that in mind, I just wanted to share a little bit about sort of what we're doing at the UW. And then we can sort of open that up to what you guys are doing at PSU and how that differs, and share some ideas and some strategies and do a little brainstorming. First of all, I have a rather lengthy quote. I didn't realize it was this interesting, but a lot of our CIOs and IT managers and other people who do IT on campus are members of EDUCAUSE. And so we reached out to EDUCAUSE and said, do you have campus leaders, CIOs or presidents or what have you, that would speak to accessibility and be willing to do that on video? We want to put together a video with such leaders talking about the importance of IT accessibility. And we wanted to do that because we had seen several such leaders at EDUCAUSE talking very eloquently about accessibility and championing it, and we really wanted to be able to capture that. And so we had a really good response to that. Lots of people stepped forward, presidents, chancellors, CIOs, and other IT leaders. And so we had this collection of people on video, and we presented that to our own president and said, here, this is a University of Washington project. We've got all these other leaders. We should have somebody from UW also, present on this video. And so our president agreed to do it. We gave him some talking points and kind of expected he would just read from what we provided him, but he just took off and went with it on his own. It's really great to see. I was there for the filming of that, and he really spoke from the heart about accessibility, and we didn't know, that he was on board as much as he apparently was, as knowledgeable as he was. But so this is one of the things that he said was, we are committed to the notion that everyone should have an opportunity to participate in higher education, whether it be from the learning perspective or the research perspective or an opportunity to work here at this institution. We benefit from that because we get to enjoy the talents and skills of those people who come in, and also their perspective, which in many cases will be different from the perspectives of others on campus. So accessibility becomes a very important value at the university. What the university offers and makes available has to be offered to everybody. We cannot afford to waste the talents or the brilliance or the minds of anybody, and making things accessible allows everybody to engage in the university. So that kind of sets the tone for a top-down, accessibility to happen. So we've got this kind of philosophical support from the president of the university. That said, we historically have not been a top-down institution in terms of accessibility or really anything else. Policy is kind of that's the P word that we stay away from. And so we don't have an IT accessibility policy. A lot of institutions do have an official policy that comes down from the top that says, we are aspiring to do this. And, with very specific details, a lot of times very specific timelines. We don't have that at this point, but we have very much been a grassroots, sort of build it up from the bottom kind of institution. And so, way back in the 80s and 90s, this sort of started with, in 1984, the creation of the micro support group, where we had a computer lab, and this was in the early days of computing, so that was a pretty special thing, I guess, to have a computer lab. And it was equipped with assistive technology. There's actually, this was an interesting thing, that there were all these technologies out there, screen readers and things like that, even back then. And so they were being integrated into the lab that the micro support group was building back in '84. In 1990, that matured into a separate lab. It was an adaptive technology lab that specifically focused on accessibility, and everything in there had assistive technology on it, and a wide variety of assistive technology. We have since kind of gotten away from that model because we didn't want students just to come to the adaptive technology lab. They should be able to go anywhere on campus and access the tools that they need. So what's now called the Access Technology Lab still exists, but it exists primarily for the purposes of developers who are creating things and they want to check out their application with assistive technologies and just get some hands-on use of different tools and get some training from the people who staff the lab on how to use different assistive devices for testing purposes. Occasionally we get students come in as well, but there's an active effort to get assistive technology deployed everywhere out there in the labs where students need it and can interact with their peers and within their disciplines. But in 1992 we did hire a lab manager, full-time lab manager specifically focusing on just assistive technology on campus. In 92 is also when Do It was formed, which as Jim mentioned in the introduction, it's a federally funded program. Primarily we also get money from the state of Washington and various other sources. But that was created kind of as a separate program to work specifically with kids with disabilities as they're transitioning from high school into college on into careers, and to work with K-12 schools, colleges and universities and employers. And so kind of the whole environment that these kids are working through, we wanted that to be accessible. And so we got a lot of different grants to focus on breaking down barriers for those kids as they're pursuing their dreams. And so to do it, we've gotten so much money over the years. Cheryl Burkstaller is the director of Do It, and she's really good at working the system and getting federal grants. And we've brought so much money in that Do It has had actually a very big influence. We've been able to partner with other people around campus on some of the grants that we've gotten. And so that's really helped just kind of expose people to the ideas of accessibility and what it can do. So, but one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that has happened to further the state of accessibility at the UW was in 2003, and that was a very simple thing. And it's amazing what an impact it's had. But creating an accessible web user group, which initially was just a discussion list. So it was this guy within UWIT who manages web servers and also plays a role in web content. He created a discussion list called Accessible Web, where people could share ideas about the websites they're building, get other people to sort of take a look at a site that's being developed and offer critiques on accessibility and that kind of thing. People could ask questions about accessibility. That has gradually grown over the years. We have over 200 subscribers now. There was a point where it became kind of the go-to resource for all things related to web because it was such an active community. So if anybody had any questions about cascading style sheets or JavaScript or whatever, they'd come to the accessibility group because that's where all the people in the know were lurking. So we had this discussion list. We also started meeting monthly had these informal brown bag gatherings. We get together and talk about different topics. We have guest speakers come in. We had a series of friendly access hack sessions where people could volunteer a website and you know, the people, members of the community would look at that and, you know, we'd sort of think through different scenarios, different problems, test things with different assistive technologies, and in some cases the person could fix problems right there, you know, live as we're doing this. And so it was a really productive time. We actually have kind of gotten away from those, haven't done those lately, but there's renewed enthusiasm to kind of revive that effort, because it was really great thing that resulted in a lot of learning and a lot of fun and ultimately more accessible sites for the people who volunteered. So this community has really been sort of, you know, as it's expanded and blossomed, it has been what's driven accessibility on campus. To the point where in 2008, we hosted our first UW Accessible IT Capacity Building Institute. To the point where in 2008, we hosted our first UW Accessible IT Capacity Building Institute. That's where we invited people from all over campus to come together, kind of similar to this perhaps, although it was more targeted. We had specific invitees that we reached out to just have a dialogue about how we're doing related to accessibility, you know, what are the glaring needs that need to be met, where are we falling short, and what can we do at the end of this event, which was a one-day event. At the end of the day, what are we going to do next? So we lead with action items. The people who participated were IT administrators, computer support staff, web developers and managers, librarians, purchasing and contracts personnel, faculty members, accessibility professionals, key vendors, people from Microsoft and Adobe were both there, representatives from all three UW campuses, and students. So a lot of interaction, a lot of things going on, and some outcomes. We had identified next steps for the university, for the accessibility working group, which was a core group that kind of formed around this activity. Next steps for vendors, even Microsoft and Adobe left with specific things that they were going to work on. And next steps for individuals, so everybody who was there left with their own personal action items, things that they were going to work on. We had a follow-up meeting to divide tasks and begin the work that we had identified. And we had accessibility representation on emerging technology groups. So those groups mostly within UWIT, who are looking at new technologies, testing technologies, and trying to decide kind of the future of technology on campus. Accessibility was going to be there at the table as a result of the CBI. Making sure that accessibility was addressed as we were looking at those technologies. So also one of the outcomes, one of the action items is to create a website to sort of serve as the central hub for accessibility related information, communicating to the campus. That was created right after the CBI, uw.edu/accessibility. At the time, that was a UWIT website, and since then it has evolved into a collaboration between UWIT and UW External Affairs, and that's actually a partnership that is a really productive one. External Affairs has the marketing team manages the homepage and creates templates for the rest of the campus to use, and it's been great to be working with them because we can influence accessibility of all that stuff that they develop. But also, they're really good at marketing, and so they've been helping us with how to best market accessibility on campus. How to get that concept out there and in the trenches, and how to get faculty and staff to pay attention to that. So that's an ongoing process, but that started with creating that website, and that website becoming a collaborative thing. In 2011, we purchased an enterprise license of a web accessibility audit tool. So we now have a tool we're using to crawl websites and provide accessibility feedback as well as feedback related to spelling errors and broken links. In 2012, we formed a high-level IT accessibility task force on campus that reports jointly to vice presidents of UWIT and external affairs. So again, it's that sort of core collaboration, but we also reached out to invite other people who were key stakeholders, including Disability Resources Office. We have separate offices for students versus employees. Both are represented on this task force, as is risk management and purchasing. Purchasing is actually a key player because so much of the IT that we're using, we are purchasing from other sources. So we've got them helping us think through, how to manage this within RFPs, get some accessibility language in all the RFPs and in contracts potentially. And the challenge we're facing there with RFPs is, even if you got accessibility written into the RFP, how do you measure when a vendor comes back and says, yes, we're fully accessible, or answers the questions that we ask? How do we, as purchasers, assess whether what they're saying is true or not? And how do we actually evaluate a product for accessibility? So we're still sort of puzzling over some of those sorts of issues and trying to figure out strategies about how to proceed with that. Because the accessibility expertise on campus is, even though we've got people who know some things, it's our bandwidth is limited. So we're not going to be able to look at absolutely every product that's purchased. So that's kind of a challenge. So the UW Accessibility site has a lot of resources, I think, that you guys can benefit from. So feel free to check that out, uw.edu/accessibility. Lots of how-to stuff related to document accessibility and captioning and web accessibility. And so that can be a good resource as well as the accessibility website that you guys have put together. So that's all I have in the way of a slide deck. What sort of things does this make you guys think in terms of what challenges you face here at Portland State and how you might go about addressing them? Yes?
Several years ago I decided that I would have more success on my own by developing websites myself. My websites are hosted off campus. I like to try out leading edge sorts of things. Now we call it Pistachio, which allows creating a blog using Evernote and so forth. Comes along and we try that out. And I'm dealing with students here on campus. I will know whether I have students who need help. Sometimes it seems like I'm going to run the risk of trying to be on the bleeding edge of something and behind on something else. Unless all those functionalities I can count on. People out there having thought things through, so when they show up on my website, I'm compliant. I'm not trying to skirt anything, but I just wonder how to pay attention to kinds of things that I can build into a website. And then secondly, have my students be producing a lot of material. And granted, it's going to be for the students themselves in the course, where they begin to curate and then share the curated material they do. Just wondering whether just an experience on what happens when you turn students loose as co-producers here and things begin to be drawn into the website, whether mine's hosted off campus or not, beside the point. But the reason I'm here is because it occurred to me, good God, I could have gotten out on very thin ice very quickly because I actually knew not much of this at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging, and unfortunately, innovation typically precedes accessibility, and so a lot of the new tools that are out there are created, and they're not accessible. And then, if they're popular enough, accessibility will eventually catch up because somebody pays attention and says, "Wow, this is a really cool tool that lots of people are using, yet it's not accessible. We need to fix that." But there's always that lag time. And so that could be risky behavior. And I guess the most important thing to do is either educate yourself about accessibility concerns. In some cases, these innovations are happening unaware of accessibility. They're not building inaccessible tools because they don't like people with disabilities. They just aren't aware themselves. And if you bring this to their attention and say, look, I've got students who are blind and they can't interact with this, or students who can't use a mouse and they can't use this, then maybe they'll fix it. But you've either got to have the knowledge to be able to look for those kind of things yourself and communicate them to the developer or the vendor, or partner with other people on campus who have that sort of expertise. And so that's where a group like our Accessible Web Group is really great for that kind of thing, because that you can bounce ideas off of them and say, hey, I'm using this new tool. Has anybody used this before? Have you checked it out for accessibility? And we're so supportive of each other in the community that somebody, even if they haven't used it, they will look at it now that you've asked and have a look and see what they think needs to be done to make it accessible if it isn't already. So it's kind of just building that infrastructure and that support community is a real key.
So being here today was a smart move on my part.
It was, yeah. Amongst all your friends. Yes.
I know most of the EMSA, if not all, has websites that are underneath the parent site of pdx.edu. So to a certain extent, we don't have access to all the coding on our pages. And I was just wondering, we use Drupal at PSU. How accessible is it for accessing with the keyboard? Because there's certain things like the way that the menus are done that we just don't have any access over. So I'm wondering, is that something that needs to change at the university communications level by working with the Drupal site? Or is that something how can we work with university communications like that?
It does involve working with university communications or whoever else manages that infrastructure. So Drupal, I will just say that Drupal itself is accessible. It's pretty accessible that they've built in. Depends on which version of Drupal you're using, but they're getting more and more and more accessibility aware within the Drupal community. And in the new version, Drupal 8, which is forthcoming, they're really ambitious about building accessibility into the core product. And so it's going to have an unprecedented level of accessibility. They're shooting for level 2A performance within core. But what happens with Drupal or WordPress or other open source communities is a lot of the functionality that you get comes not from core, but from all these different modules and themes that people build. And even if core is accessible, then all these other things can be inaccessible or can break accessibility. And so that's where you kind of have to have somebody, who's working within the infrastructure, who's aware of how to look for accessibility, and is kind of vetting the modules and themes and things, to make sure that whatever is being recommended for use across campus, is accessible. So that's something we actually use a lot of Drupal on our campus, and we actually have a project that's just in its early stages now, getting underway, identifying what the key modules are that people are using around campus, and then testing those for accessibility. And if they're accessible, then we're going to keep a master list of recommended modules that are accessible. And if they're not accessible, then we're going to kind of put them on the use with caution list, and then work, because it's open source, try to contribute back to the community and make those accessible. Work with the developers of those modules to see if we can get accessibility built in. That'll benefit us since we're already using those modules, and it'll benefit anybody else in the world who wants to use those modules. So,
as far as I know, modules and themes are all done at the university communications level. We can only access there's one theme, which is the pdx.edu theme. And then there's, if there are modules, then those are dependent upon the plugins. And we're given access to the university communications.
Yeah. So working with the folks within university communications who sort of manage that, make sure they're understanding, they have good understanding of accessibility. It's kind of key to that. happening successfully.
Hey, Terrill.
Yes.
Can I actually come up and show the bottom portion of the accessibility website, which
Sure.
lists certain resources?
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to go back to the. So this is what you would see when you arrive on the site, and then if you go down, we have resources for different situations that might come up. So the first are questions related to students, including prospective students needing accommodations. Who would you call? That would be the DRC. And then for employees, HR. And then other questions that come up about web content, university communications, reporting concerns about discrimination or harassment would be equity and compliance, and then faculty with D2L questions or concerns. And at this point, we have OIT help desk, but I think we could probably change that to Office of Academic Innovation.
Yeah, I think it's both. So it's both the OIT help desk. So to answer your question specifically, there are people set up for you in the Office of Academic Innovation and also the Disability Resource Center. So you don't have to be out there alone. And that's the hope, is that there are people within these sub-offices who have this level of expertise, and so you're not out there on your own. And so what this is to try to help you get to those content experts.
So what else? That's actually very helpful information on the kind of thing that I'm hoping we can sort of churn up here. You know, what other resources are out there that can kind of help folks with accessibility? Or what resources are needed that maybe don't exist yet?
I could probably just add that while there are certainly a lot of elements of Drupal that general content managers don't have access to, like how the menus are actually rendered, there's two things. One is that change the things that you can, because you can affect those things. And then if there are problems that you notice about things that you can't, report them. Let us know about them so that when we do have updates or we do further development, we can address those kinds of issues.
And by we
meaning university communications. Sorry, we know each other. So. Yeah, sorry.
I wasn't sure if everybody in here knew that.
So I just wanted to add on to that all of the templates that are in place for the webs are in fact accessible. It's just the things that get added. So things like the videos, we want to make sure get captioned, or any documents that get added, we want to make sure that they're in an accessible format. So PDFs or other types of documents that get added to the template, that's what we need to make sure that we're doing those additional accessibility checks.
There is, however, a contact template that's not accessible. It has a CAPTCHA on it. So that one would be inaccessible.
Yeah, there is the general contact form for all sites that use the form has a CAPTCHA in it. You don't see it when you're logged in, so you can kind of forget about it, but it's there.
And there's an alternative.
And they're working on that.
Yeah, okay.
It's on our to-do list.
Okay. Good to know.
Yes?
Well, since I ventured out on my own 2-3 years ago, and you mentioned there was the tool that your university purchased sort of check things out. I'm used to running my sites to look for broken links and all. Anybody out there sort of produce something that, kind of compliance checker? Or, you'll obviously have one on campus, but I guess I'm just wondering, is there kind of a systematic, smart way for me to actually look? I don't build particularly complicated sites. I don't think it's when I add these new functionalities that I figure I might have a problem. Just one of the strategies to actually look to see what the hell's broken, like to fix it.
Yeah, there are some checkers, some free checkers out there that you can use for your own sites. One is WebAIM is a really great resource for all things related to web accessibility. WebAIM, webaim.org. And it creates, among the other things they do, they create a accessibility checker called the Wave. And if you just go to webaim.org, you can find that, where it's actually wave.webaim.org, I think. And That's just as simple as typing in your URL, and it'll then provide some feedback related to accessibility. And there's several others out there too. You can just search for accessibility checker, find quite a few. So our website here, I think we talked about that a little bit and provide some links to some of the checkers that are out there. The one enterprise-wide, do you all have any accessibility checkers? Yeah. They're much discussed on our campus. There's some people that feel it's not a great idea because it gives sort of this false sense of accomplishment that you pass the checkers checklist and you think you're fully accessible, but really that's not the end of it. That you could have a totally impossible site to use that passes the checkers checklist. But it's a good way to raise awareness is kind of the way we look at it. And so the fact that it's sending people emails saying we scanned your site and you've got 50 spelling errors and 48 broken links and some accessibility errors, they know about spelling errors, they know about broken links, and they want to go in and fix those. So it's a service. We're not like the police. We're providing service to them, and they're appreciative of that. And accessibility just kind of rides along. Like, okay, we fixed the spelling errors, we fixed the broken links, now let's look at this accessibility thing and figure out what we need to do. And so it just sort of helps to raise awareness of accessibility. And then, some basic things like, heading structure and alt text on images can be fixed as part of that process. So, but there are several enterprise-wide tools that provide that sort of functionality. Yes?
I don't know the faculty member in your name, but I'm from the Office of Academic Innovation, and we're currently developing tools and resources for faculty, along with workshops on accessible course design, either on a website platform or within the Desire to Learn, and that will be coming out in the next month before classes start, so you can look for it. And we're here as a resource for faculty, just so you know. So if you need help or you have questions, you can look for the workshop. I'll be working with Mark, one of our instructional designers. So we are here for you, and we're working as hard as we can to get all of this developed.
The ice doesn't feel nearly as thin.
Yes?
You actually answered part of my question. Thank you. And I want to say, and the adjunct is part of communication. And so we're always doing things like, teach new media and help com. So we're always doing like YouTube and cool media things and the graphics and all that kind of stuff like that. And I was just curious, just a comment, it would have been really helpful. Like, I have interest in this with my dissertation, some usability, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But it would have been really helpful during like orientation or something to have gotten a heads up. There's these resources to make sure that the courses you design were accessible. I think in some ways it's like, I don't know, I've been teaching for a while, and this is one of the first firms I've ever seen that really sat down and talked about this outside of my usability instruction. I think that's it.
So just to respond, I believe the new faculty orientation this semester is coming up, and we do have it planned to develop this. So I don't know, because I'm a new hire, if we've been doing this in the past or not, but we are planning, this is on our plan to do for this semester. Yeah.
Great. So someone mentioned captioning earlier. What happens now if you produce a video, whether you're a faculty member or just producing a video for your department? How do you go about captioning that? Is there sort of a recommended method or funding available to support that?
So I can start. So back on our resource page, there is an instruction on actually how to do that. So the instructions are pretty easy. It's just time intensive. So it's, for example, in the event that the faculty member doesn't have time, and a student worker who can assist. And then if there's a student actually who's in classes requiring that, then there's some potential assistance with the DRC on something that we have on contract. But eventually this is something that we're trying to make sure that everyone has the skill to do, and under those links off to that helpful links to the left-hand side, it offers simple instructions on how to actually caption. It's just that time-consuming part. So if there's something that's coming up immediately, like a current event, for example, that we need to make sure has captioning, especially if there's a student in class who has those accommodations,
Yes.
What would you say that you've noticed are some of the non-technical reasons why campuses and personnel within campuses don't, that the things that they're creating and developing are not adhering to some of these accessibility standards?
I think the biggest non-technical reason is just lack of awareness. That we've been trying to get the word out. My bio is 20 years now, trying to get the word out, and it's growing. More and more people are getting the word, but there's still a lot of people that aren't. And the biggest problem on our campus at this point, after so many years at it, the biggest problem is document accessibility. That we've got, because of its scale, millions of documents, hundreds of thousands of people producing documents. And it's just really difficult to reach them all and to educate them on the fact that all PDFs are not the same. That there is a process that needs to be followed in order for a PDF or a Word document or any sort of document to be accessible. And if you don't follow that process, then you're going to end up with content that's document that's not accessible. And so people just need to be aware of what those steps are. We've got them, they're up on the website, but not everybody knows to go to that website. We offer trainings, but not everybody's aware of those trainings. So that's the biggest challenge, is just getting that awareness out there. And we are, just a plug, we are tomorrow, well, I don't know if it's a plug because it's sold out, but we are doing document accessibility trainings tomorrow, 2 of them, part 1, part 2, and video accessibility trainings. So we'll be covering both of those tomorrow in a hands-on lab, and actually those will be filmed, so the videotape will be available and accessible afterwards.
On the accessibility website, no less.
So I have an external vendor, our university ticketing website. What do I send to my vendor to tell him this is what Portland State wants to see on your website as far as accessibility goes, and what deadline do I give him?
Then there are specific list of questions as well on the resource page as well, in terms of answering the specific questions regarding accessibility, and they, as the vendor, should be able to answer those questions and then send the information back to you.
So that's on that same.
And then when you receive that response from the vendor, is there some support for evaluating that vendor response?
Yeah, so that would be our OIT along with purchasing, or you can always call Jen or myself as well.
Yeah. Excellent. What other ideas or questions or concerns or observations?
Can you talk about social media a little bit, and just accessible platforms and things to keep in mind when posting, say, Facebook messages to?
Yeah, well, it's good to be cognizant of accessibility concerns. If you're going to use Facebook or require use of Facebook or communicate with students via Facebook or Twitter or what have you, then just like anything else, check into accessibility first, and right, and it changes a lot. Any of your Facebook users know that Facebook will roll out a change with no notice, and that may or may not be a good thing for accessibility. I know that Facebook does have an accessibility team, and they have described, I've talked to them, and they've described a climate there where the mainstream developers, a lot of whom came from Apple, are very on board with accessibility and are working hard to improve accessibility of Facebook, which historically has not been very accessible for screen reader users in particular. I saw a presentation I went to the CHI conference, the Computer Human Interaction Conference in Toronto earlier this year. And Facebook was there. They gave a presentation on the research they had done, where they had, and this raises some privacy issues perhaps, but they know who their screen reader users are, And so they did a massive data mining comparing their screen reader users with their other users on how they use Facebook. And the screen reader users, on average, were actually more active than other users. So they're logging on more frequently. They're commenting on, they're putting up their own, updating their own timeline more frequently. They're commenting on other people's posts more frequently. And they're even uploading photos more frequently than people who don't use screen readers. So that was kind of interesting, and I think their whole point in presenting this was Facebook is accessible, otherwise this wouldn't be true. And I know I've got friends myself who are blind and largely using mobile Facebook app on iOS and are doing well with VoiceOver, the screen reader that's built into iOS. Provides basic functionality, maybe not access to everything. They probably can't play Farmville or whatever the cool app is nowadays. But they can at least do the basic stuff that somebody would want to do. And so then the question, if you're using this for delivering content, academic content or other communications to students, is what is it you're doing exactly? And is this function accessible within Facebook? And probably the best way to find that out would be to test it. So just have a user, either a native user or just somebody that knows how to use VoiceOver on an iOS device. Just try it and see what happens. Twitter actually is a good model of accessibility because there's so many different choices of clients. You can use whatever tool you want that accesses Twitter. Some of those are more accessible than others, but the people who need accessibility features know which tools to use in order to get that. And so that's a safe bet, and probably will be a safe bet for a long time to use Twitter to communicate. So, other questions? 7 minutes. What happens next, Jen? Is there like somebody want to create a discussion list to keep the
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, we know who all of you are. Just like Facebook, we know who you are. And what we can do is, follow up with you once the video from today's recording is captioned and up on the website, along with the recordings for tomorrow. And I do feel like there's a renewed energy around this conversation, so this won't be the end of this for long. I think, like I said earlier, EMSA brought Terrill Thompson here today because we as a division have decided that by the end of the academic year we will have completely accessible websites. So I encourage you to go back to your departments if you don't work in EMSA and have the same conversation. When we start churning out trainings and workshops, we will not be exclusive about that. So there will definitely be more coming soon.
Sure. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. It's great to have this conversation. I benefit from talking to you all and finding out what your struggles are and questions are and so forth too. So it's great.
Thank you so much.